So back to Ev Hales. Ev Hales is our guest artist tonight, and she lives in Melbourne, Australia. So there, it's about 11 o'clock in the morning, and it's getting towards the fall season where we are hopefully getting towards the spring season here in Minnesota. So Ev has a very impressive resume. She loves to paint, has been painting her whole life and teaching her whole life. She's done a lot of teaching. She's had exhibits in China and throughout the world, and has done a number of tours, artistic tours with students around the world. Uh, Obviously, that's been curtailed by COVID recently, but she loves to paint just anything really. And tonight you're going to see several pre-recorded videos about her studio, and it's kind of a unique setting. I'll just leave it at that. And she's going to talk about brushes, paints, and papers, the types of papers. So I think your questions about those that normally come up will be answered right off the bat. I think our focus tonight is going to be about skies. If you looked at the newsletter, there are 3 different vignettes of skies in the newsletter, and she's going to talk about how she does skies and her wet on wet technique and so forth. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ev, and you can start your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Art, and thank you for the invitation to join you all this evening, morning, wherever we are. I've prepared several video clips that we'll go through, and they cover different aspects. So I'm hoping you'll enjoy these, and feel free to ask questions which we can answer at the end of the session or after each video clip is shown. And I'm going to start with where I live and what I like to paint.
Hello, I'm Ev Hales. I live in Hurstbridge in the bush, and this is my backyard. We have lots of native animals that come to visit us. The kangaroos are always a delight, and I love watching the baby joeys as they negotiate the world with their extra long legs and then jump back into the pouch, and mother just goes along with her business, taking no notice. They camouflage well in the bush, as do the local swamp wallabies, which are quite cute. And the echidnas, they swim at our bowls every summer and are a delight to watch. And then there are the birds. So many different varieties, many with brilliant colours. And of course the kookaburra has a wonderful song, and the tiny, tiny pardelos. This is my studio, which is set several hundred metres from my home. I enter a private, creative space that has no contact from outside except the birds in the bush that surrounds it. It is my private, personal area where I get lost in whatever I am painting. There are 2 sections in the studio, and this section is the creative space where I actually paint. It's quite tidy at the moment in this image because I was getting ready for an open studios inspection. In the other space, I have storage elements, plan drawers, shelving for storing paintings that have been completed, spaces to view pictures while they are in process, a kiln for some of my on-glaze work, and a comprehensive library of inspirational books. I like the books written by artists themselves. I have also written several books, a book of my own process, and painting instructional material. I want to show you a little bit about what I paint. I like working on plein air, and I paint all around the world, taking people on painting tours to discover new places. There is endless variety in the landscape, from the Sahara to the sea, into the outback and the gorges, and then of course there are flowers. And I find line work is addictive. I like to combine an atmospheric sky with man-made objects, and I'm passionate about pavements. And then there is the water, which is just wonderful. Escalators are a metaphor for modern life, and there are many dynamic spaces in the urban environment. That's just a little glimpse into my artistic world.
So that's the first little introduction. And now I'm going to do an introduction on what we're going to look at today, painting skies.
We're going to explore skies today, and this is such a huge subject. We can have the simplest of blue skies, we can have scudding clouds, we can have sunset glow, we can have soft nuance, we can have clouds hiding the mountains, we can have clouds dumping on the land. The only time a cloud shape is constant is in a photograph. Skies can conceal, they can reflect, they can direct your eye, they can energize the scene, they can amaze you. When the sky is impressive, keep the landscape simple. A foil for what is happening in the sky itself. The composition should support but not distract from the sky. The sky can be any colour, from the most bizarre reds to brilliant yellow to clear blue, or even grey. And a grey doesn't have to be boring. It will always have a flavour or temperature. Here the coolish blue-grey to a warm yellow grey. And then there's a warm mauve grey, all in the one sky, all at the same time. Being able to create a variety of edges is a critical skill for a watercolourist. In this sky all the edges are soft. Here we have a range of crisp and soft, and here the crisp edge reveals the land. The sky can also communicate a sense of distance in a scene. The diminishing size of the clouds creates spatial recession, and this example shows layering of cloud, size variation, and the loss of intensity in the blue that also indicates recession. Then come the challenges for us as watercolour artists. How can we interpret those different things in our paintings? Our tools are different paper surfaces, different brush types, and how we use the water, both on the paper and in the brush, to vary the edge. Now we know all about skies, we can start to put pigment on paper.
This next little clip is some of the techniques that you will be seeing in the actual painting demonstrations. And these are just short clips of the way I am using some of the brushes.
I'm going to explore
Oh, sorry.
different paper and brush techniques for painting skies. Brushes make different marks that can be formal or informal. The edge quality is about painting into damp, dry or wet surfaces, and different paper surfaces allow different marks. Starting with a cold press or rough paper, we're going to explore this. This cold press paper has a light texture, and I'm working with my informal Hake brush here, and I'm just dragging the colour down, creating those fluffy cloud edges that I'm then now softening with a damp, clean brush and lifting off any excess. Working on a similar surface, this time with a stiff synthetic brush, the paper is still totally dry, and I'm going to have it on a slight angle so that the water will head towards the base. Dry the brush a little and just drag the colour down. If you note how I'm holding the brush, it allows me to almost caress the surface of the paper, making those informal edges. If I hold the brush normally, this is much more difficult to achieve. The edges tend to be sharp and dabby, not fluffy. So if I go back to just putting the brush almost flat to the surface of the paper and teasing the colour around, I get a better result. Again, I need to just soften if I'm working on completely dry paper and take any excess moisture from the edges before it has a chance to bloom. Using the same paper, but this time I'm going to spray randomly before I start painting. I'm adding the colour, and you'll notice almost immediately there are some sections where the colour is bleeding into the sprayed water on the surface. This is changing the appearance of the edge. I'm working almost exactly the same way as I did before, but this time I'm getting more variety of edge as I'm painting. I want to build some grey into the clouds, so I'm adding a little tiny bit of sienna to that blue, and that just softly greys it and keeps it in harmonious colour. A low line of cloud can be just indicated by virtually just laying the brush flat across the surface. Again, I need to soften, so that clean damp brush just takes away the harshness because I'm working on a completely dry surface at the bottom. Just modify any strange marks. Make sure that you pick those up while the paint is still damp. Using my spin synthetic brush, not as a pointed brush, but as a long or almost 2-inch brush or 5-centimetre brush, I drag it across and I can create some lovely water effects with the same brush on this surface. The paint just skids where the paper is rough. It's much easier to do this on the broad hake brush. And that's a sky that's been painted in this way, with the varied edges, the diffused edges, so the clouds are almost disappearing into the blue of the sky. It's quite an effective way of creating an energized, cloudy sky. Coloured paper is another option. And this time I'm going to explore the blue Bockingford. And this is perfect for a winter morning. Because there's no bright white in the sky, there will be no harsh contrasts. Again, I have dampened the paper and you can see what is happening. This is virtually the same technique, but I'm using an ordinary hake here and just teasing those clouds in and out of the sky. And that's the finished painting, which has a lovely subdued quality to it. And that becomes all about mood. I'm going to use a square Taklon brush on smooth paper this time. The most important thing in this process is to keep the brush drier than the paper. And I must start with a damp surface on hot press paper. I want to make sure the entire sky area has been evenly wet. So I'm brushing across it several times. I'm not going to paint with a sopping wet brush. My brush will be dryish because I want to create some cirrus clouds on this surface. Just building the value a little leaving a few areas of white. And I need to make sure that the brush is very dry and clean. I lean heavily and drag it through the colour that is already on the surface. Dry it again and take the excess paint off. Lean heavily and push those streaky clouds through the sky. Now I could stop here and have this kind of sky, but I'm going to add another feature here. I'm putting some clouds down low, and it's quite hard to be soft with a stiff Taklon brush, so I'm employing my Oh My God brush once again to just soften those edges. And I want to put some layering in the sky. I want clouds that are lower than the others in the sky. And so I am painting across the cirrus clouds that are quite high in the atmosphere. You can see I'm trying for an informal edge here, and it's not particularly easy with the square Taklon brush. So again, I'm using that damp hake to modify the shortcomings. I'm looking for some big shapes in the sky here. I don't want the cloud just sitting in the middle, so I'm putting some smaller that is indicating a little bit of distance at the same time. And this is all being done in one application. So the paper is quite dry, but still just moist. It's not completely dry. If it were completely dry, I would have very hard edges that I can't move. Now the brush is getting drier because the paper is still damp. Now this is a different technique with the brush. I'm going into blue, a little bit of cobalt turquoise and some pink. And the brush is quite dry. I want more water in it, but instead of adding it at the tip, I'm adding it at the base. And I'm just working the moisture through the brush. This way I keep the intensity of the colour, but I'm adding a little more moisture. I'm changing the angle of the brush mark, and I'm creating some water. Fast marks across will give me broken edges. And don't start where you finish, start from the other side of the page. This way you won't get a vertical mark in the middle. I want to smooth off and grey a little bit the foreground, so I'm just using my Taklon brush, which is a little firmer, and you can see how that just gets rid of the sparkle. I'm making this section go at double speed because we're really not about this sort of landscape today, but I just want you to see how the sky is balanced by the foreground. And I'm using energized brush marks here. It's all really about the water. So the rocks come across. There's some areas there that have got the grey, and that's where the rocks are under the water. And where the rocks are on top of the water, they are richer colours and they have sharper edges. I'm building a few layers in these rock formations, and I'm changing the scale of the rock. You'll notice I'm not starting with the top of the rock. I'm starting with the section that sits into the sand or the water, anchoring it before I worry too much about the shape of the top of the rock. I can come back and adjust that at any time. I'm creating a pathway through the rocks that gives a sense of layers and lots of little calligraphy marks here. And now I'll actually get to the top of the rock and give it a bit of form and a bit of crispness. And we're almost done. You'll notice I haven't touched the horizon in this painting. I quite like that broken edge there, but I am going to suggest the layers in the water that are coming through some of the areas of the rock. I'm also going to suggest how the rocks sit into the sand and get the angle of that sand bank sweeping down towards the waterline. That's all created by the colour of the sand against the base of the rock. And now I'll bring in the big guns with my Taklon brush, and this lifts off beautifully on this surface. And I'm creating the sense of the level of the water here. So I'm using my Taklon brush in the sky, and I'm also using it in the water here. But when I come and make or fluffy clouds, then I really need to modify the harsh marks of the Taklon brush. You've seen a sky painted on hot press with a square Taklon brush, one on blue paper, and one with varied wetnesses on a cold press surface. The paper plays a huge role in the feeling of your sky. Any brush can be made to make different marks, but the paper surface will dictate how the paint will sit on the paper.
So that's just a little glimpse of how you can use different brushes to create a sky. You don't need to have a particular brush. It all depends on how wet your paper is and how you're actually working with it. I'm now going to go into the first of the demonstrations, and this demonstration is actually on a hot press surface, and it's about a sky where the sun is just glowing through in the late afternoon, and it's quite a mood painting.
So Ev, I have a comment before we start.
Sorry?
I have a comment before we start. The Bockingford paper that you referenced is available in St. Paul at Wet Paint. And it's a unique paper that's 50% ragstock and 50% wood chip. So it's kind of an unusual paper. A lot of the English artists use it, I know. So I've tried it and I like it.
It's really good if you paint quite directly. If you like to fiddle and fluff around, it's a disaster because the colour will lift off quite easily. So I find it's a great surface to do, you know, sort of a background section and then a direct painting on top of that. But if you try and start glazing, it's much more difficult to work with. Yeah. But it comes in a whole range of colours. It comes in oatmeal, blue, grey, green, and it can be a fabulous way to just start a nice mood painting.
Yep.
Are we ready for the next?
I have one question from Linda. What is the paper called, please? It's Bockingford.
Yes, Bockingford. It's made by the Cuthbert Mill in England. And it's not an expensive paper. You know, paper has got to be terribly expensive. So it's a sort of a more middle of the road price range. Okie doke?
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to paint a gentle mood in the sky on this hot press paper. It's perfect for subtle skies, and the granulation is amazing on this surface. The most important thing to remember when working on a hot press paper is to dampen it, because any hard edges are very hard to remove from this surface. Once the paper is fully damp, I'm using a damp but not really wet brush to add some colour that will be a base colour to emerge from underneath the grey clouds. I don't want any hard edges on this colour. I want it to just sort of emerge from the surface. And so I'm using my Oh My God brush to feather out any excess moisture. This brush is just damp and it barely touches the surface. I'll add a little bit more warmth. I'm squeezing the excess from the brush so that
nothing blooms and creates awkward marks on my paper. A little bit of that up the top, and that lovely bright white area in the middle. Now I'm going to show you mixing some greys. And what I'm using here are my cerulean, my rose madder, my burnt sienna and my cobalt basically. There was a little bit of white in that well of on the palette, but that's okay, and in a grey it won't hurt. Adding a little bit of the burnt sienna into that changes the grey from a purplish blue to a warm grey. And you'll notice I'm picking up all the pigment here because the cerulean in this mixture is a heavy pigment and will drop to the bottom of the well quite quickly. I'm not wasting any of the pigment there, just wetting it through. And in this palette, this particular puddle is on an angle, so the heavy cerulean will fall to the bottom corner and the lighter pigments will be at the top. I've just made that a little more pink and even a bit more. This makes a beautiful grey, the cerulean and the madder. And over the top of this other colour that has been allowed to dry completely, I am now re-wetting so that anything I put on here won't have hard marks on it. And that paint will not move unless I press heavily and keep going and going and going. So I've dampened it all. And now I'm going to load my brush and add this colour on top. And you can see even at this point, the pink and the raw sienna are coming through that top layer at quite different rates and giving the sky a temperature so that the grey is not neutral. There's not quite enough water here, so I'm adding a little bit with the spray and then just lightly feathering. I don't always tape my paper down. Here I've just got it sitting on my easel surface and I can pull it out as required. I can pick it up and move it around as required. It's only a quarter sheet, so it's not too large to handle. And the board is on an angle so that any moisture is heading down the page. I want to keep that brilliant light in that sun glow section, and so I keep coming back to that with my dry brush. Again, I'm picking up that pigment to make sure that I've got whatever colour is there on the brush. This is such a subtle painting that I need to be careful. Again, that tissue under the brush just takes any excess moisture away and allows me to just add paint that will sit where it's put on and not bloom into that damp surface. This is the trick with working on hot press paper, being able to match the moistness in the brush to the wetness on the page. This is a darker grey now. I'm lightly feathering. This paint is not on a dry surface, so it is slightly damp and I can move it around if I am very gentle with the pressure I put on the brush. I don't want to have to come back on this sky, so I want to build any depth that is required at this point. keep going back and lifting that bright light out because I want that to just glow through. I know the effect I'm after. I don't need to look back at my source photo for exact ideas because the cloud will shift. As long as I have that sensation of the light bursting through from behind the cloud, then I will be okay. And I need a little bit more value in this sky. Putting on some quite wet paint here. I'd like to build a bit of granulation if I can, and so having that extra moisture there is a good idea. I want the sweep of that cloud coming across. And I know that this is going to fade a bit as it dries, so I can afford to make it a little stronger than I want. This is the water down below, so the same colours that I'm using, a change of brush direction, and all of a sudden I've gone from a sky into the horizontal water. Now there's a lot of wetness just in that middle section of the sky. Again, take that little bright light off, and I don't want to wipe that off. So I think I'll pick it up and just turn it around and let it dribble through. So holding the paper on an angle, and I'm letting the water just carry the pigment. I can't hurry this. I don't want to put a hairdryer on it. I just have to wait, and you can see that beautiful line I'm getting across where that granulation is actually just going to settle on the page and create a beautiful effect. There it is. The moisture has virtually travelled across the page. There's no excess there. There's some beautiful granulation happening, and if I can bear to just stop fiddling, I think we'll be fine. And I'm going to be happy at that point. I'm going to let it dry completely. And now I want to create the waterline. And this is a really simple way to do this. Get a right angled edge of another sheet of paper, line it up with the edge of your page, and then just paint across. There are no strong tones on this picture. It's all quite soft and muted. It's that late afternoon light that's just the sun just glowing through the haze. So that's created for me the edge of the waterline without any fuss. And I use that technique a lot when I'm painting seascapes. If I don't get the horizon quite right, I can either come back and lift some off or come back and add to, one or the other. I want a pile of shrubs and bushes here. And again, I'm using the colours that I used to mix the grey, but this time with a little bit more intensity, and this time with a little bit more individuality. I'm doing this onto dry paper because I want a few crisp edges. If I get a few crisp edges, then the sky will look even more soft. This is not quite doing what I want it to do. I'm still getting too definite a mark there. So I'm going to try changing the brush, and I'm just simply scumbling across and resorting to that ever-present finger brush. Not getting too precious here. Mixing a little bit more depth. The point of the brush there gives me the line against the water. The back of the brush will give me a more broken mark. I just want the sense of shrubs and layers of shrubs here. This is very dry, so I can just sort of, I don't know, just dibble-dabble it through and create some foliagey looks on some of the edges here. That didn't quite work. So now I'm going to a different brush. This is quite a stiff Taklon brush, and I'm going to paint the palm tree with this. So it's too wide, so I've divided it in half, and I'm literally just loading half of the brush. I've got my finger on it to splay it a little bit, and just painting that around that segment gives me the body of the palm tree. I'll go to my other favourite brush, which is a, I can't remember what it's called. It gives you a beautiful broken edge and lovely calligraphic marks, a very fine point and a very fat bottom. And if I lean on it, I get a heavy mark. If I just use the tip, I get these beautiful fine calligraphic marks. And as the sun's just breaking through, a little bit of that raw sienna colour in the foliage, as though it's capturing just those tiny little bits of sunshine, is enough to create interest in my foliage. A few little punchy darks. And even though I'm painting on dry paper here, I have got a nice variety of edge forming. There's another little vertical here, a post, and a link to the marker in the water. I'm not sure what it is, but it's a lovely shape, and it's a bit like a mini lighthouse without being a lighthouse. I don't need that line to go all the way. The eye will carry the connection, and it's got a lovely sweep. So I'm now going to use my chisel brush to paint this little structure. I don't want to make it too fussy, so as far as possible I'm going to use the shape of the brush to do the work. Just by putting marks, that gives me the impressions of those verticals. Laying the brush completely flat fills some areas in. And then for these vertical sections, if I just make a mark, not a vertical mark, a horizontal mark, I get quite a nice brush mark going across there. A lovely full across the base to anchor it, and it's almost done. It's enough detail to tell the story, and a little bit in the middle to indicate that it's solid. A strong base to anchor it into the ground, and a couple of little marks at the top to just finish it off. And I'm happy. Now for the water, and this is done with one. I should have kept going and not get that little vertical, but I've got away with it. From right to left and left to right. The brush is multi-loaded with several colours on it, and I'm carrying that colour into the background just so that they're related. And it's almost there. I need a little bit more in the water, a little bit of a sense of some reflections, and I'm using the Untidy Hake to just touch some of those water movement sections and the reflections at the same time. Enough, but not so definite that it's twee. This painting is not about this.
It's about the sky. So this just needs to have enough interest to hold the viewer and to be a foil for what's happening in the sky. That's all I need from this foreground. It's all about the mood, and it's gentle because there are no strong value contrasts. I've used the underwash to create colour subtlety, and it also enhances the kinds of greys I've made. The hard edges amplify the softness of the sky. It's a simple painting that relies on the hot press paper. This is where the sky was when it was finished. Once I add the land, the whole equation changes. I painted it over 2 sessions so the paper could dry completely. I do not like to use a hairdryer. I like to let the paint settle itself so that I can really see what's going on. The actual time to paint this is what you have seen, a mere 17 minutes. There is a bit of thinking time in between that, but the actual brush on paper is just that quick for this picture.
So that's the first demonstration on the hot press surface. Do you want to go straight on to the next one?
This
There's a couple of questions, Ev.
Yep.
Let's see, who is this? Linda was wondering, were you working from a reference photo on that last page?
I had, if you recall back in the sky video, just hang on a
We're
minute.
going to
and I'll,
explore skies today.
I'll just mute it
And
and
this is
bring it
such a-
up, see if I can find the spot. There's a spot in here somewhere. You can never find it when you're looking for it.
I know you said at one point you kind of more remembered what the photo looked like than were using it as a strict guide.
Yeah, that's right. If you try and paint exactly from a photo, you will be too stiff. You will inevitably be too stiff. So painting on plein air teaches you that you get a sense of what the sky is doing. And I can't find it, but when you have a chance to go back on and look through there, you'll see there's a photo where it's of Venice, actually. We're looking across and the sky is doing pretty much what I painted. But the essence of the sky was the glow, right? So there's the painting there. Okay, so the glow of the sun coming through, that's the essence of what I was trying to achieve.
Okay.
But if I had kept that in front of me, I would be trying to get all these little bits, you know, and I would make it stiff. So knowing that the essence is this glow, a variety of the greys and some of the warmth, that's really all I need to know to paint it.
Thank you. I think that answers the question. And we have lots of questions about your brushes. Do I understand correctly? There will be a video at the end where you talk about all your brushes and materials.
There will be. I've done a separate section explaining all of the brushes. You probably hear me talking about the Oh My God brush, which may be one of the questions, is it?
Well, yes, I think so.
Yeah. And the Oh My God brush is really just oh my God, how did that happen brush? Okay. And it can be any brush in your kit that is clean, damp, and virtually in your left hand, ready to arrest the error. So I'll talk about that in the brushes, but that's what that is referring to.
Thank you. And that answers all the questions so far, Ev. So we're ready to go on whenever you are.
Okay. So the next demonstration is on a cold press surface and is basically painted onto mostly dry paper. And I turned the volume off.
Using a damp paper for this. Unlike the hot press paper, it doesn't matter so much if this paper is not damp. And I want to use the crisp edge for some of the scudding clouds. You'll notice with my bamboo brush here that I am laying it on the paper and simply almost smooching the back of the brush in order to create informal edges. I now have a clean, damp brush, and I want to soften some of those edges so that they're not all the same. A similar effect could have been achieved by spraying randomly before I started, but in this occasion I'm just using the Oh My God brush, which is clean, damp, and in my left hand, ready for action. The blue in the sky varies in intensity as it reaches the horizon. So this blue is a little different to the blue that's on the centre of the page, a little lighter. And when I put another patch of a deeper blue at the top, this will indicate that the sky behind has a sensation of space on it. I've got mostly cloud on this paper, and I don't actually paint the white of the cloud, and so I'm painting the blue in behind it to indicate where the cloud is. I do the same thing if I'm painting waves down the beach. See, that blue is a little deeper? And just a couple of little patches of blue here along the edge of the page so that the cloud is not all the way around. You need the impression, the big impression of the sky when you're painting. You don't want to get too caught up on individual clouds and things. Using the back of my hand, I check how dry the paper is. And because I'm doing this as a demonstration, it's another reason why I haven't dampened a lot first, because I want to be able to keep painting. This is my normal palette, and if you want to see exactly what colours I use and what brands they are and why I choose these particular ones, there's a YouTube clip on my Hales channel that explains all that fully. But basically it's just 3 shades in yellow, aureolin, raw sienna, burnt sienna, cerulean blue, cobalt blue and ultramarine, and then I use a rose madder mostly for my red. So I'm mixing greys here, and I want it a little warmer, so I added a bit of raw sienna to it. It's just taken that coolness out of it. And now I am using a little bit of spray just to help soften some of those edges and move the paint a little easier. This Saunders paper is a 640 gram, and it's really a bit like painting on cardboard. It's not my favourite surface at all, but it does the job. You'll notice I'm just pretending I'm a cloud with these marks and just foofing around, warming the grey a little. I don't want this to be a boring pre-mixed paints type grey. I want lots of nuance in the colour. And if it's too pink, you add a bit of sienna, blue, cobalt turquoise, something to it to just take away if the fact that it's too warm. I like to have my clouds have crisp edges and also melt away, and it's nice when the colour of the cloud actually melds into the blue of the sky and they become the same value or tone. I'm in no hurry here, because basically when I finish this application of paint, the sky will be pretty much done. Adding a little bit of the sienna to the blue gives me a lovely grey. And if I've used a cobalt in the blue, then I would use that naturally as the base for any grey that I mix for this sky. These brushes are untidy, they're not refined, and they occasionally lose hairs here and there, which you are noticing up in that top corner. But I like the informality that they have. That's the oh my God brush again. It's damp, it's clean, and it's ready in my hand immediately I need it. It doesn't really matter what sort of brush it is, as long as it is clean, damp, and ready for action. So I'm looking for big movement in the sky here from the large, deep cloud on the top left, and a fair bit of cloud down low. You'll notice there's no sketching on the paper here because everything on the land in this scene is darker than the sky. So I'll paint the sky, and then if I mess it up a bit in one spot, I'll lift the land up a little bit higher. It doesn't really matter. I don't have to have it all drawn in before I start. If I have a really fabulous thing happening in the sky, I might move the building a little bit in order that I don't hide that spot. If some of this were pre-wet or sprayed, then this part of the process could be a little simpler. But I'm having fun here, just not making waves, but making clouds. Notice the variety in the grey there. There's almost a blue section down in that bottom area. And so the colours have interest, and when the viewer goes closer to look, they are rewarded by that interest. A little bit too much contrast up there, just a tiny bit more. And I'm doing this while I've got the greys in the palette all mixed up. I don't have to remix anything, so it's a good idea if I can get it all done at once. I might have to come back later, but it's easier if I don't have to. To take the colour, not the colour, but the water out of the back of the brush, if I just lean it against a tissue, like you notice there, and actually squeeze, then when I put the brush onto the paper, which is almost dry, it's not going to add extra water and bloom on me and create cauliflowers that I don't want. So monitoring the amount of water in the brush is important. And here I just want to feather away some of the marks and make it a little softer. When that is dry, I do a little bit of drawing, and I position my building into the cloud where it will maximize the impact. For these greens, I'm mixing a little bit on the paper, a little bit in the palette, but mostly I'm going to add bits and pieces from the palette directly, just like that. A bit of raw sienna into that cerulean, and I get a nice variation of green. And again, it's not all one flat shade. Here I'm mixing, and you can see how the colour is much more uniform and not nearly as interesting as when I let the paint mix on the paper. In this particular painting, I'm doing mostly mixing on the palette, but I vary the technique according to what I want the painting to say. This painting is really all about the sky, and so the foliage is a support for the building and a neutral mid-tone or mid-value to play the sky against. So it's not critical to have masses of interest in the colours here. can see how I'm leaning on this brush. I love these spin synthetics. They're really bouncy. You know exactly how heavy you are pressing, and you can get lovely energy in the mark. And then they bounce back and give you a beautiful fine line without you having to make any adjustments. I'm leaning very heavily there, but the brush is back ready for nice pointed mark making. Now for the building itself. I don't want to labour this, it's just simply a shape, and so as quickly as possible I'm filling that shape in with just attention just on the edge. Wherever I can use a brush to get the mark, I will. A change of tone to indicate the different building quality from the roof to the walls, but really not a lot else. It's a silhouette shape that is just a foil for the sky, so it's really not important. The lovely distinctive shape of the French buildings, country buildings, is the important facet, and that's shown in the tower. A little bit of extra value to indicate the light coming from that patch of blue in the sky. And all of this down here, I don't know what it is. It's some kind of outbuilding. It's a play of a geometric shape against the softness of the foliage. That's really the only importance that it has. But I want to use the mass of the foliage now to tie all these together. I have the geometric roof shape, and now I want informal marks. And so I'm changing how I'm holding the brush. The brush is always pretty loose in my hand. And you'll notice when I want to suggest a different kind of tree, I will change the basic shape. And I scumble across some of the cold pressed paper in order to get those less full leaves around the edges of the tree. And if you watch carefully, the brush is twisting in my hand as I'm applying it to the paper. That ensures that I do not get a dab, 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 dab reproduced mark that gets boring too fast. And there's a few little trees down the side here, and I'm just using the side of the brush to make these. I'm not painting them as trees, I'm making interesting marks. And then I will find a tree out of those marks, add to it if necessary, but I'm not actually painting particular trees. A little bit more attention to detail here, but not too much. Then there's always the old finger brush. That's a good one to have, and that's always on hand. I'm basically mixing all these greens from my Rolleolin, burnt sienna and raw sienna, and my cobalt and cerulean. I will add a little bit of the rose madder into it when I want the green to become a little greyer. The thing I don't particularly like about this Saunders paper is how flat the colours get. There's not a lot of bounce through the paper. It tends to absorb the colour. So I have to make sure that there's enough tonal variety and enough variety of texture to hold the viewer's interest. I'm just going in to a wedge brush here, and I want some fence posts. I don't want them too formal, and I can do that with this is about a 1 centimetre wedge shape, and that keeps them nicely informal and not too solid. So basically wherever it hits is the mark I get. And it's enough to just break up that straight edge of the paddock. Now some little energy marks, and this has got a good dose of the rose madder in with the green, and they are a nice strong dark accent, just breaking up that foliage, breaking up the paddock a little bit. When I look back at it, there's a couple of areas on the sky that I'm not really happy with, and I probably should just leave them alone, but I'm going to show you some ways you can fix it. Always dampen first, that way you won't get a hard edge. And remember, when you paint the colour on, you don't want the value to match what's already dry on the paper, because if it's exactly the same value, it will be too light when it dries. So that's almost taken off that area. And I think this little blue bit in the corner is just a bit of a distraction, so I'm going to come across with some grey there. I think this holds your eye better in towards the house. And the blue underneath it is not a problem. The cloud has just literally moved across it. And that happens when you're working on location all the time. And it's the best way to learn about what clouds do, to try and paint them while you're actually out on site. Now down here, the paper is drier, and you can see that I'm getting edges, and I've got to play a bit harder to try and get rid of them. So it looks like it's all done at once. Still a bit more. And this is so much like cardboard, this paper, it's quite horrible. But anyway. We're just about there. And this is the problem, you know, you just can't help yourself. You've got to make it that little bit better. I'm sure we can all relate to that one. And I'm in fiddle mode, and I'm not sure that I'm actually going to add anything of value. I should have been happy with the cloud I had and just left it. But, you know, we can't help ourselves. And I'm even going to go further and put a little tiny bit of, you know, gouache on this just to make sure it's really much better. By the time it dries, remember when you're painting gouache on, it's going to actually dry darker, so it's got to look almost too bright to show up. The watercolour dries lighter, the gouache dries darker. I just didn't really like the way that cloud had like a little top on it, so I think I've made it a slightly better shape. But whether it has actually added anything, it doesn't really matter. So when the paint dries, it seems to settle into the page, and I've looked at it and I thought, I really want a little bit more action, a few extra darks, and so I added to the shadow on the roof and some dark energy marks in amongst the grasses and down the paddock. And cold pressed paper is perfect for crisp, energized edges.
So that's the second demonstration. Have we got any questions before we go into the brushes and just the finishing off?
I don't see any new questions, except I'm hearing comments about you are so good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Someone else said, love those cute fence posts.
That's good. That's good.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll go into the brushes and talk about what I use.
I'm going to show you and talk about the brushes that you have seen being used in my demonstration. These are the brushes that I have used today, starting with the bamboo hake, which is a short multi-bambooed handle brush. It's similar to normal hake brushes, except it's not so refined. The short handle means I hold it differently, and I can use it like an extension for my arm. And this is perfect for clouds, foliage, bushes and waves. The next brush I use as a favourite brush are my Vinci Spin Synthetics. These are synthetic brushes with a wonderful bounce. You can actually feel how hard you are pressing, and they always return to their correct formation. The other brushes that I use are the Needlepoint Squirrel, which is great for informal marks, and the Anders Anderson Neef. I can turn this fine pointed brush into a 4 centimetre brush by changing the angle. The other brushes are the Taklon Stiff Square Shaders, and these are great for lifting paint off. I use a range of sizes of these, and they are perfect for this purpose. I know all of these brushes and know of how to get a variety of marks from each of them. The way I use them would often horrify their maker. And then there's my Oh My God brush, which I use all the time, having it ready in my left hand. It can be any kind of brush as long as it doesn't hold too much water. It needs to be clean, damp and ready for use. More often than not, it's one of the bamboo hakes for me, but it really doesn't matter what brush it is as long as it is ready. It's for those, oh, how did that happen moments. If it's not ready by the time I find one, ensure it's clean, not holding too much water, and get ready to change the thing. The paper has dried and I'm in big trouble. The bottom line for you is that whichever brush you have in your hand most is the one that will work best for you. If you want to try new brushes, that's fine. Explore how many marks you can make from each of them. As a watercolourist, to have fewer brushes when you're working rather than more is an advantage because you know exactly what the moisture content is in your brush and you are less likely to create those disastrous too much water moments when you go in with a wet brush into a semi-dry area of paper.
Does that answer your brush questions?
I think it does. Someone just asked to repeat the name of the lifting brush.
The Taklon, Taklon.
Uh-huh.
They're often used, I think, for acrylics as well, but they're just a firm but not stiff brush, and not too, if you're wanting to lift in the small areas, not too long, so quite short.
Let me just check here. I think those are all the brush questions taken care of.
Yeah, I have
I'm not pushing you hard enough. Obviously, there's not enough questions.
I have a
We'll
question.
get to other questions.
Ev, you talked about, or you showed us a brush that looked like a calligraphy brush.
Yeah, the squirrel point.
Squirrel point.
Yeah.
Who makes that brush?
Good question.
I'm going to show you and talk about
hang
the
on.
brushes that you have seen being used in my demonstration.
Oh, wait a minute. It's a, no, it's the one before that. Art Basics Needlepoint Squirrel. Did you get that? Art Basics.
Yep. Now, is that synthetic or is that?
It's a squirrel.
Oh,
Squirrel.
squirrel. Okay, squirrel. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just got a fat piece here and a very fine tip. So it's wonderful for branches and any of those sort of calligraphy marks on, winter trees. It's wonderful for that sort of thing. Absolutely
Okay.
fabulous. Okay.
Yep.
So now we've only got one left. It seems to have gone very quickly. Are you all exhausted?
No, I think
No.
we're fascinated and we're right on schedule.
Okay.
So don't worry about that.
So
Another comment here says about your clouds, when you paint, it is just magic.
thank you.
And then someone else now is asking, what does the fat part do on the squirrel brush? I understand it just holds additional water. Is that correct?
It is, but also I'll just show you. I'm not sure. Hang on a minute. I'll turn the volume off. Yes. When I'm in the foliage here, if you see, I'm using it an occasion. Oh no, it's the wrong one. If you just lean, you'll get a fat mark.
Okay.
I'm sure there's a spot on this video, or maybe it's here, where I just, no, it must be back further. You see those beautiful, it's just lovely to use. Here we go, in this little section. See how when I come down into I lean a bit, so I get a thick and thin, and here I'm just leaning with the back of the brush. Can you see that? What happened there?
Yep.
So you can build variety in the mark really easily with the brush. So it's quite versatile, really.
And, sorry, go ahead, Ev.
And you don't just use the tip. On any brush, whatever the brush is, if it's got a varied shape, then there's a reason for that. So don't feel like you have to just use a fine pointer for the fine point. You can actually, if you've got a really long quill, using that on the side is fantastic, because you get from a pointy brush, you go to a fat brush all in one, and you don't have to go back into your paint. You know what the tone is or the value of color is. You know how much water's in the brush. If you pick up a different brush, then you're introducing more water and you might not have quite a rich enough color for what you want to do. So the fewer times you actually have to change your brush, the better.
That makes sense.
So the last little clip, it's only a few minutes. Oh no, it's actually 10 minutes. And it's just a few finishing techniques when you have a sky that didn't quite work, or you need to just come back and add something. It's just a few techniques on how to do that without messing everything up.
To finish off some paintings that didn't quite work or that faded while they were drying. So I'm going to look at some techniques to help you with that. Common mistakes are that the sky is too light a value once the land is added. Addressing that can be quite simple. In this instance, I want to increase the value of the sky at the top and reduce the contrast against the building so that my focus is on the flowers. I'm going to turn the sky upside down so that if anything should dribble, it's going to go towards the top of the painting, not into the subject matter. I'm mixing my grey quite carefully
And this painting is also on a hot press surface, so I will need to make sure that I dampen the sky before I start. See how I'm changing the value of the grey? I'm warming it a little with the raw sienna so that it's quite neutral. I'm dampening the page now, beyond where I think I'm going to go, and just putting a layer of paint across there. You can see where the paper's a bit dry at the top. I haven't worried about that because I knew I was going to be adding value into that space. Now I don't want to work too fast here because I want to allow the paint time to move on the surface. I'm on a slight angle, so I know that any excess water is heading down, and you can see how I'm watching what's happening here. Some of it is quite wet, and so with my Oh My God brush, I'm just lifting off a few segments and feathering out excess moisture. I also want to reduce the contrast against the hillside, and so I'm adding a little bit of depth there. But mostly it's at the top of the sky near the building where I am focused. Can you see the excess moisture about to bloom? And I'm just going to feather that away with brush strokes that barely touch the paper surface. I'm not in a hurry, I'm just going with water. And you can see how that extra value pulls your eye down into the subject. Where I started on the left, by reducing contrast in the sky against the building, I've redirected the viewer to my subject. The horizon line is not effective, and this is especially relevant for scenes where the sky meets the water. I've got some strange things going on at that point. And so I'm going to use a straight-edged piece of paper lined up against the edge of my painting to ensure that I have a horizontal line. And the first thing I'm going to do is to lift off the area on the water that is a little bit too dark. I'm just going to use a stiff Taklon brush and dampen this area a little. I'm not going to scrub, I'm just going to lift off. That has solved that section. I now want to lift the value in the sky itself against the ocean, and so I'm placing the paper the opposite way, still lining it up on the edge. Again, mixing my greys, cerulean. That's already in the sky, a little bit of raw sienna, which is too green, and a touch of pink. It's a bit like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Too pink, add a touch of cerulean to cool it, and I'm getting more to where I want to be. With that already pre-mixed, I now dampen my surface. Again, I'm working on hot press paper. And then I just bring a line across. I'm careful not to go over that rock mass too much. Now you can see an interesting thing happening here. The rose madder and the cerulean have quite different qualities as pigments. The cerulean is heavier and falls more rapidly to the surface of the paper. The rose madder is lighter and tends to float. And so we get this lovely, almost a thin layer of pink across. I think I've solved that little problem with the horizon line, and that was quite easily done. If I want to add more cloud to change the mood of a piece, I'm working this time on rough paper, and it's dry. Because I want, scudding clouds so that the wetness does not matter so much. The Oh My God brush that was in my left hand is coming in handy here to just soften some of those edges so they're not all hard and they meld into what's already there.
I want a sweep of dark across behind the building. I want to reduce the contrast in the bottom corner here, and so I'm adding more cloud so that the contrast of the cliffside is reduced. Again, that oh my God brush that's just damp comes across and just softens those edges a little. And change the direction at the back a little bit. I'm going to hold the painting in, and so I'm adding more depth right across the top, but not evenly, just here and there, which will hold the viewer's eye into the painting, not letting him escape, or her. Again, the brush is on the side and it's just scumbling across the surface, and the oh my God brush is doing its task, softening that edge. I'll add a little bit extra cloud in here, creating several more layers in this storm that is ominously threatening us. And a bit more depth, I think, behind this whole landmass and the tower structure. I'm introducing some of the blue now that just matches in with the hillside. Stand back and have a look and see whether you're actually getting the movement and the effect you're after. The tower's looking a little bit flat, so I'm going to lift a little light off one side, and that's using my Taklon brush. I'm not sticking a tissue in it because I don't want a harsh lift off. I'm also going to add some tone to the tower and on this right hand side of the building to enhance the form of it. Not all over, just here and there, and just letting the brush make marks in order to do this. A little bit more light off this central section, and I'm using my angled shader for this. Again, I don't put a tissue on it, I just dampen the brush and drag. This bottom corner is looking a little bit weak, so I'm going to throw some more colour in here. And these are all pure colours that I would have used to mix the greens. And they look really loud and scary at this point. But you can see how that's pushing us back up into the hillside. I want to soften the edge, so I'm just using the side of the brush that is now clean and just letting that seamlessly integrate with what was there. Looks a bit flat, so maybe some really bright yellow. And I'm mixing this so that it's a little bit moist but got lots of pigment in it. And I'm just going to spatter this into that damp colour. And let it do whatever it fancies, really. It's making some really interesting little mixtures there. And that's letting the watercolour play an active role in our picture making. I think we're just about there with that. Do you want a closer look? You'll notice in my darks there's some really pure colours amongst it. And the rework sky supports the mood of the tower. I've removed the contrast at the bottom left and added stronger direction behind the tower itself, guiding the viewer to where I want them to be. That was just 3 ways to balance the sky when a painting's almost finished. Increase the value, define the horizon, and add extra intensity and direction in your cloud formations.
Done.
Excellent. We have one question now. Do you ever wet the back of your paper?
Not often. I very rarely ever soak, well, I never soak my paper. because if I soak it, everything's wet equally, and I like to be able to get a variety of edge. Unless it's a really hot day, I might wet the back of the paper on a hot press surface, but normally I wet when I'm ready I wet the paper to get the edge I want when I'm ready to do it. So as long as you let the paper dry completely, you can come back and re-wet at any time. So and you can never work a whole sheet of paper. Well, I can never work a whole sheet of paper all at once. So I wet the areas that are relevant and work with that dampness until it's gone past workability. And then I wait, let it dry and come back and work again. I paint several paintings at once. I will work on 5 or 6 or 7 paintings, and I'll do a bit on this one and a bit on that one and a bit on the other one. I just do the bits that I see I want to do. I very rarely ever paint from start to finish in one sitting, because you can't see what's happening with the water, and you paint out all the good bits if you do that.
Thank you. A couple of questions about your paper. Barb says, so informative and concise explanations for brush strokes on each type of paper. Do you have a personal preference for the paper that you paint on?
Yes, well, it depends what I'm doing, but I love the hot press. I love the variety, the nuance, the whole feel of watercolor that is possible on a hot press paper. So that's, and for skies, it's, you know, particularly relevant when when the sky's got that transient quality and that luminous quality. I think the hot press paper does that so well.
Do you prefer 140 or 300, or do you use both?
I use, now you're talking pounds. I use
Pounds.
300 gram or 140. That's what I use most.
Okay.
But I also use 90 if I'm on location. And I really like the way paint sits on the lighter surface, on the lighter weight. The heavier paper is great if you're doing a full sheet and you want a bit of workability, but like with the cold press, it's sort of more like blotter. I like a paint surface where the paint sits more on the top and there's more bounce of light. And that's where the Bockingford's quite good for that.
Okay. I wonder now if we can turn off your screen sharing. Yep. And then we can go to any other general questions. And I think the 2 paintings that you showed, Ev, maybe yep. You show them again now in full speaker view. Maybe.
So hang on, I've got to find speaker view. Where's speaker view?
I think you're fine. I think you're fine.
Okay. Yeah. So
oh, it's still very small. Oh, here, I have to switch to speaker view. If you aren't seeing full size of Ev, for those of you watching, change from gallery view to speaker view, and then you will see a larger size of that painting.
Is that working?
Yes, for me it is, yes. Definitely.
So that one's on hot press, and the softness in the sky was what appealed there. This little one, the little tiny one, is it's just a really small piece, and I just loved the way the granulation and the movement there on the hot press surface. This one is on a rough paper, and that was perfect for the so almost abstract into the cloud mountains scenario. That was painted on location in New Zealand, down in the South Island.
You get such depth in your skies, Ev. It's just amazing.
This is one of my favourite little paintings.
Wow.
It's a real moody. Can you see that? Yeah.
Yes.
Real, and that's on hot press, but it's got a real mood of the beach on those sort of oppressive days, and the birds flying home to get home before it all went to pear-shaped.
Yes.
That's got a lot of atmosphere, that painting.
Yeah. And there's a lot of translucence that you get with the hot press surface, or I find I can get with the hot press surface.
Someone asked, since you paint to the edge of your paper, do you matte your paintings or do you let the edges show?
I usually matte them up in a mount board when I frame them up, but I don't tape. Look, I paint quickly. I'm impatient. I'm not good at painting to a set size. So if I stretch paper and put it on, it's always the wrong size or shape. So I don't tape. And if I want a wide edge, I'll just mask it off and rub it off. But I don't worry about that. I mean, the matte changes that anyway. This is on a cold press. And it's got a completely different feel to it.
I love the purple at the horizon.
Yeah, well, that was added later.
I wondered.
That was added later as in the same way that I demoed the one for you a few moments ago.
I love that you go back in and do that, because I'm always afraid to go back in and try and correct something. 9 times out of 10, I end up making a mess of it.
And that will be because you have hard edges and then you try and soften them and then you get into trouble. But if you dampen first, beyond where you want to correct, with not too much water, but dampen it across, then that stops that problem. And this is just a bit of a wild one.
That's nice. Very nice.
So there's all sorts, I don't know. This is another one that isn't, this is an on location little sketch job in Florence. And I just had some colour on and basically did a pen drawing and a little bit of colour in the roof of the Duomo. So it's a way of using a sky without feeling you have to paint it too perfectly.
So Ev, I have a question. This is our, how do you know when you're done? I always ask every artist this question.
Well, it's probably a really important question with the sky. I think you have to be happy before you're happy, basically. If you're working from a photograph and you're trying to make the sky exactly like the photograph is, you're going to overpaint. So what I would recommend you try is, if that is the way you have to work from a photographic source, then do a little value study where you have the lights and the dark. So you get a real sense of where you need the strength and the direction in your painting. Get it started and then put your photograph away and just deal with the sky you've got. And you saw in the stormy sky I showed you how you can, if you look back at that, when you have it loaded up on YouTube or whatever, have I made that sky any better by doing those adjustments? Probably not. I probably should have just left it alone. So my moral is, be happy before you're happy. And as long as your sky has the sense of movement and transience, then it's okay. The cloud doesn't have to be the same as it is in the photo, because 2 seconds after you took that photo, you would have got a different cloud anyway.
So it sounds like you said you work on 5 or 6 paintings at a time and kind of put them aside. that to me would be a real challenge because you've got different things going on with each painting, and you've got to kind of change your whole mood when you're working on one painting versus another, and coming back to that.
Well, actually, that's right. But what I do is, and if you go back to the and look at the studio, you'll see that when I'm in the studio, I'll have 5 or 6 different paintings, and they're not all skies. They won't all be the same subject. What I do is I'm quite focused in how I work, and I'll actually have notebooks, and I'll sit and look at a painting. I spend a lot of time looking at paintings, right? And I'll look at the painting and I'll say, oh, that horizon line isn't showing up enough. I need to make it darker or lighter. And I'll actually write that down. And if I can look at a painting and I can see 3 things that I need to alter, I need to lighten the horizon, I need to reinforce the level of the water, I need to add a rock in it. That's 3 things. So I'll do that for painting 1, for painting 2, for painting 3. I never write more than 3 things. So I'll pick up my painting and I'll look at what my list says, and it says do the horizon, the rock, and the water level. So I'll do those 3 things, and then I put it away. I stand it up again. I will often, when I'm working, say, oh yeah, I need to add, oh yeah, I could add a bit more. But the reality is I haven't looked at what those 3 things that I did that I saw as being important. I haven't looked and assessed what changes that has actually made to the whole process. So until I can stand back and look at that objectively, I won't know whether I've done enough or too much.
Mm-hmm.
And that stops me. That's the way I figured out as to how I can stop overpainting. Okay.
Yep.
If I'm writing down more than 3 things, I'm writing too much.
Yep.
Just go back to 3. Those 3 will make significant changes, and it may mean that the other things you thought of doing are no longer important.
Yep.
So with the sky and with the waves, the most important thing is to be happy before you're happy, because you really can't see what your sky is doing until you put the foil of the land in.
Yep.
Because once you paint the land into it, it sometimes means you need a little bit of extra depth. But you can't know that until you've actually got that tone on the paper.
Yep.
Okay. So
for the benefit of our audience, could you give us the website for your books if we want to order some of your books?
Yep, it's www.evhalestuition.com. And my other website is evhales.com, www.evhales.com.
Okay.
And I've got an Instagram and I've got a YouTube. There's, I don't know, 20 odd demos on the YouTube channel, and that talks about the brushes and colours and a whole range of things.
Yeah,
there's a fair bit of material there for you to look at.
That's where I first saw your work. I remember seeing a painting you did with kind of an orange sky and a dock kind of in the foreground. That was very, very good.
Yeah.
A couple of other questions, Ev. Are you part of an art community in Australia? And has your art been affected in any way by the pandemic?
Yes, I'm part of the Watercolour Society in Victoria, and I've been part of various art communities, the local ones, and also, you know, different mediums, but mostly the Watercolour Society these days and the Melbourne Society of Women Painters and Sculptors. The pandemic, I have been doing a lot of Zoom live drawing during the pandemic, and I have been loving this. If you go to my Instagram account, you'll see some of those things there, and I'm just about to put up a range of works from there. And there's a Drawn from Life ebook, which has video clips as well as paintings in it. I think the pandemic has made me reevaluate what I'm doing. I can't really see getting back to lots of framing and gallery stuff at the moment. I'm sort of thinking, I'm not sure about that. I'm trialing an online sort of exhibition. I'm thinking about doing salon type things at home rather than big gallery stuff. I'm thinking that I'm more going to market my work as unframed work rather than spending thousands of dollars on framing that you don't always move, it gets damaged. I suppose those sort of things I've been thinking about in a different way, whereas earlier you just jump in and exhibit everywhere. And I'm getting older. I'm in my 70s. I haven't got that burning need to be whatever. It's I'm really more about doing what I feel is important for myself. Yeah. So it's made me more introverted, if that's the correct way of saying it. Yeah.
I think all of us, we're going to have to relearn how to enter society, I think.
Yeah, I think
when
so.
this
I
is
think
over.
yeah. I think you.
Barb is wondering if, is your approach to plein air any different from your painting in the studio? And what do you take with you when painting on location?
Okay. Painting on plein air is, I'm just about to go down and do a 4-day workshop with a group when I finish this talk. For me, it's about filling the creative bank. So when you're in the studio, you're working from your inner resources, your materials, the source material you have. When you go outdoors to paint, you don't know what you're going to see. You don't know what the light's going to do. You don't know how fast the paper's going to dry. And if you're open to anything, then you won't even know what sort of subjects you're going to encounter. So what I feel, and I teach mostly on plein air because in terms of teaching, I can actually be looking at someone and someone else is looking at exactly the same thing. And we can share what we're both seeing and work out where to go. If you're trying to explain a concept to someone when they can't see what you're looking at, and I think someone asked me the question before about a source photo, it's much easier if you're out there. And I look at it as when I go out from this teaching thing I will be doing tomorrow, I'm going to be going ka-ching, 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 ka-ching as I'm dropping tokens, visual experience tokens into my creative bank. And I feel the plein air is about, for me, not coming home with finished paintings, but coming home with snapshots, ideas, moods. It's not about creating a masterpiece. It's about information gathering, learning new techniques, finding subjects I would never have thought to paint. And all of those go bang, 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 bang in my creative bank until it gets overflowing. And then I'll go in the studio and it all comes out in, this whatever. So for me, plein air is such an important part of painting because it does literally refill your creative resources. What do I take? When I go overseas, everything I'm painting with will fit in a small backpack. My brushes, palette for painting outdoors. One of these palettes. that folds up. I take a few brushes. I take, it all fits in here, and that will slide into my backpack. I have a squash down water jar, and I take that, and I take a couple of different sorts of paper with me. I usually work on just sitting on a stool, a low stool, where all of that can sit on the ground, and that's how I work. There's a plein air, on plein air, the first ebook, the digital book is Painting on Plein Air, and that goes through, is one of the resource materials I would give to people who come away painting with me. So it goes through a different range of working techniques when you're outdoors. So that's quite an interesting one if you're interested in that aspect of it.
Thank you. I think that I will just ask if anyone else has another question. Oh, someone just asked, have you gotten into any urban sketching?
I paint a lot of urban subjects, and I do sketch, but I haven't actually got involved with the sketching groups, if that's what the question is. But yeah,
It's kind of the same thing in a different format. Probably.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
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 Any other questions before we wrap up? I think that's it, Ev. I'd like to ask all of our members to unmute so we can give Ev a round of applause for what was an excellent demo. Everyone really appreciates and says what a good teacher you are. So thank you, Ev.
Good job. That's wonderful.
Bravo.
Bravo.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it, and I hope you all stay safe over there. And I hope we all get back to the situation where we can visit one another in other ways other than Zoom.
So we can tell that you are an experienced teacher because there were many comments about how thoroughly you went through all the processes that you showed us tonight, and how you explained how your process, how your approach was for each type of painting and surface material and what,
Yeah.
subject matter.
Yeah.
And I have been recording it, so as soon as I get it downloaded, then I will upload it to our YouTube channel. And Ev, I will send you a link to that YouTube.
Thank
And
you.
then for our members, the link will be in our next newsletter, hopefully.
Yeah. And if people are interested on the websites, there's a link to a newsletter that I do. So if anyone's interested in joining that, that's where I'd love to have you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much, Ev.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk with you.
Yeah. What's the temperature there?
Sorry?
What's the temperature there in Melbourne?
It's about 20 today,
Really?
so quite mild. Yeah.
20 degrees.
Celsius.
Agreed.
Okay.
Yeah. It's quite a mild, sunny day, and I'm about to drive down to Aireys Inlet, which is on the Great Ocean Road in Victoria, which is a beautiful part of our state. And I'm doing an on plein air workshop with people down there for the next few days.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Ev.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Have a
Thank
good
you, Ev, and have a great day. Have a nice travel down to your event.
I will. And
Thank
thank
you.
you all.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye for now.
Good.